think I will draw from my own personal experience. When I joined the Senate, it's one thing to read the articles of a constitution, but it's another different thing altogether to process them and work on it as a legislator. Therefore, I knew of the provisions of Article 96, giving the mandate of the Senate, and Article 217 on the sharing of revenue that is raised nationally between the two levels of government. But
As of Parliament, in terms of coming up with bills, especially on the money side of that bill.
The Parliamentary Budget Office has been extremely useful to the committee. As you are aware that these are highly technical staff who carry the institutional memory of Parliament as a whole, and have interacted with many topical matters that the committee and the Senate in itself undertakes as a matter of responsibility.
What we realized as Parliament of Kenya is that we were lacking good capacity with respect to facilitating members of Parliament to fully understand what is required of them when it comes to budget making. The role of Parliamentary Budget Office is indeed to help houses of Parliament, to help legislatures to understand their role in budget making, to find their place, rightful place in budget making, because houses of Parliament are not supposed simply to approve or reject budgets, the role and value of a budget, but also to make impact.
The role of a Parliamentary Budget Office cannot be gainsaid in a legislature, because it has to be understood that one of the most fundamental and important roles of a legislature is the budget making process. In fact, to a very large extent, the independence, the autonomy, the efficacy of a legislature is viewed in very large measure from the perspective of how much influence it has in the budget making process.
But basically, the Parliamentary Budget Office has come a long way, and currently we have 3 departments. The Macroeconomics department, which basically does macroeconomic analysis among other macro variables. That is like the center department, because it gives information both to Senate and National Assembly on matters of the macroeconomy, the larger economy, that so to speak. Then we have the expenditure department, which basically serves the National Assembly, the 20 plus committees in the National Assembly in terms of budget analysis, budget implementation, among other tasks. Then we have the Senate Affairs Department, which is basically dedicated to the Senate in terms of helping committees of the Senate, and specifically the Finance and Budget Committee, on matters of devolution, on matters of sharing the cake, national cake, the division of revenue, the county allocation of revenue legislation, as well as the county government additional allocation legislation.
Further, Parliament was not adequately capacitated to analyze the policy documents, and its involvement remained largely a formality, a rubber stamp. The Parliamentary Budget Office was therefore established to address this weakness.
When the motion had been gone through Parliament, the National Treasury had protested that there can't be a similar office named the same. But there is one thing that you realize there is a difference, because them, they are a bit gagged in this sense. Even when they realize things are going wrong, they will have to say what the executive wants to hear.
The creation of the Parliamentary Budget Office has been incredibly useful to members of Parliament. It provides valuable expertise.
Is that the budget making process is an extremely consultative process. Being consultative, that means then that role is given to the representatives of the people, because it's a consultative process. And even beyond giving that office that deals precisely with budget making process, then it means they incapacitate those parliaments, and therefore, in other words, then shift that role to where the expertise is.
Thank you so much. I'm informed the washroom are on my right-hand side, just behind here. Thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to invite the chair of the ANPBO, Dr. Jantis. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much. I'm a bit short. I don't know that I'm short or the stage is longer or what, you know. Good morning, or should I say jumbo everybody. I'm learning chair of the budget committee. I'm learning the language. I'm gonna get there. Thank you so much. Look, where I come from, when there's an event taking place and it rains outside, it's a blessing. So I'm quite happy to see the rain is raining today, which means we are blessed, and the event has been blessed, Dr. Masinde. Thank you so much for the opportunity. On behalf of the African Network of Parliamentary Budget Office, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Parliament of Kenya, led by the Honorable Speaker, Honorable Dr. Moses Watengula, in his absentia. Thank the Chairperson of the Budget Committee, Honorable Ndindi Nyoro. Thank the National Assembly clerk, Mr. Samuel Njoroge. I also thank the Senate, the clerk of the Senate, Mr. Jeremiah Nyengenda. But I also want to take the opportunity to thank my colleague, Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office in Kenya, Dr. Martin Masinde. Thank you so much. But also, just remind ourselves, he's our Secretariat of the African Network Budget Office. Thank you so much for this opportunity. But also, I think the African Network of Budget Office would also like to thank the government of Kenya. I would also like to thank people of Kenya in general. You know, really, it's very important, and friends as well in Kenya for agreeing to host the 6th African Network Parliamentary Budget Office a conference. But also, most importantly, Chairperson, the clerks, and the director, the warm hospitality we have received thus far. I must say, I haven't had any report of any bad vibes. We've been getting very good feedback. Thank you so much for that. It's very great indeed. And I would also like to greet all the honorable members who are here, and thank you so much for being with us today. I know there are others who are also attending virtually. Also greet our special guests, our speakers, our presenters, and all colleagues who are here in person. But also we recognize technology has gave us power to be in different places all the time. Also recognize our colleagues who are virtually with us today. My name is Dumisani Jantis. I'm the Director of Parliamentary Budget Office from South Africa. But I think today I'm addressing you this morning. Been sent by the African Network Budget Office really to give an overview of the network and why we are here today, but also share with you our thinking, our initial thinking and vision of this board that we've created in ourselves as peers in this regard. I think we can all agree. I was really encouraged by the video, very, very encouraged by the video we just watched, I must say. I wanted to say that earlier, Dr. Masinde, because we can all agree that our continent is yet to really reach its economic and human development potential that it has to have. And therefore, like our developed society, like other developed societies, other governments and legislatures, clearly our governments are going to have an important role to play to ensure that our continent realizes much needed development as we set out in different frameworks that we will talk about later. We can all agree that our governments are inherently resourced, both human, finance, and other resources that enables our executive branch of government to really drive this development that we need in a continent. On the other hand, Chair and clerks and Director, the legislatures are inherently in lack of this capacity. these resources for oversight over government, ensuring that we reach this potential in this regard. So we established this network in 2016 as a forum of members of the budget office in the continent and to share some experience and expertise in supporting our members, and also as a way of building capacity for both members and also for the members of the legislatures within our continent or within our budget offices. We established the network from our own understanding that as collective we will make an impact towards the development of a continent as we want in our role where what we would be doing. The ANPBA provides us a platform where we can strategically share experience, expertise around the budget offices, and also beyond the budget, beyond the continent itself, as we heard Dr. Masin earlier, recognizing that we always have partners from beyond the continent. We've got our OECD partners, Cabri, Brazil, and South Korea, and many other partners who often participate, who also share their experience within where they come from, which enriches capacity, but also enriches our parliaments, ensuring the capacity that's required is in place. The network has had and will continue as a space for capacity building for both technicians, members of parliaments and legislatures, respectively. And since we've seen that, since the establishment of the network, we've seen many structures, similar structures within the continent in other countries, actually establishing budget offices or similar structures which recognize the importance of these structures in place. The establishment of the network was at a backdrop of the conversations, the development within the continent of the African 2063 developmental agenda. In this regard, we also know that the African Free Trade Agreement came into force in 2019. In support of oversight, we aim to advise our legislatures, our parliaments, on how executive branch of government is unlocking opportunities through these important and other development documents that are put in place. In particular, when we think about the likely impact of the macroeconomic performances and other outcomes, but also how these strategic developments are impacting our budgets over time, and how are they enhancing. Hence, I was saying, when I was encouraged by the video, some of these things are already picked up there. It is clear that the implementation of these continental economic development strategies will further enable much needed human and economic development within our continent. The oversight over the green budgeting or carbon budget systems are also important as part of Parliament oversight, given our commitments to address the concerns surrounding climate change impacts on societies and our economy within the continent. We therefore also aim that our analysis and advisory to our Parliament ensures that the climate fighting mechanisms introduced by governments around the world and our continent must never disproportionately affect low-income households in particular. The introduction of the green budgeting intentions should be to avoid passing on the added cost of carbon taxations to consumers through higher electricity pricing, for example, and more expensive goods and services in particular. So our analysis will take that into account. Therefore, as a budget office, we aim to ensure that low-income households, but those also in need, are not disproportionately affected some of these climate-fighting mechanisms. Given these contexts and many other considerations, the network is aimed at human and institutional capacity development and strengthening in providing usefulness insight to members of parliament into how budget impacts our economies, how budget impacts our societies, but also how budget itself improves our public finances and public finance positions and performance in that regard. We can all agree that the African continent is different from other continents. We see we've got more younger citizens, yet we are less developed like many other continents. That creates an opportunity. That's a huge opportunity, a huge potential for us to drive our own economic development within our society, within this context. And the issue is, how is our budget office supporting our legislatures to try and take advantage of these mechanisms and develop our continent. And therefore, our parliaments have an important role holding executive branch of accountable to ensure that the continent develops towards what we want it to be. Therefore, the BBO's credible research analysis are of crucial importance in supporting our legislatures, our parliaments in this regard. It is clear and evident that the establishment of PBO is one of the mechanisms adopted by many countries to ensure better technical capabilities to support members of parliament in their fiscal oversight. We have to recognize that the level of human capital and institutional capabilities requirements for parliament is largely dependent on whether the legislature's budget making, whether it is a budget influencing, and whether it budget improving, and so on. So that's very important to also put that into context. Therefore, as a budget analyst, we have our work cut out in supporting a legislative within the continent in this regard. It's clear that these issues within the planning, the issues around the planning and functioning of the rule-based fiscal framework in enabling countries to raise their development aspirations has translated into an increased countries establishing budget office or similar entities in this regard. The sixth conference this week, we are hoping to ride on the momentum we built from 2022 Harare conference. The Harare conference took resolutions, including adopting the network charter that establishes the governing council, but I'm also pleased to note that many of the network members countries, parliaments, including here in Kenya, they have recognized the network and the charter itself. We are very encouraged by that. And this meant that the charter has been enforced, and this conference was organized and taking into account the charter provisions that are put in place. It's a very good test for us. I was telling the colleagues, it's an equal conference where we use the charter, and we are very, very happy that things have went so smoothly. It is a great milestone for the network itself, and hopefully now the network will continue to build on capacity and ensure that they can stand on their own. The sixth conference here in Mombasa is intended to cover a variety of discussions and the following themes: the understanding of an African development challenges and opportunities, collaborative partnerships for strengthening public finance management, ensuring finance transparency and governance. We also have a planning session where we'll take stock as a network how far we are and what some of the mechanisms we can still do to institutionalize this platform. In conclusion, Chair, members, colleagues and members, let me also remind us again that the NPBO conference is an opportunity for members of the NPBO and our partners to share experience and expertise in supporting each other and building our own technical capabilities where we think about our members of parliament across the continent and beyond. We reflect on so many and various macroeconomic and social matters facing our continent. And colleagues, I just want to also emphasize it's important that we are conscious during our discussions and debates and avoid temptations or situations where we impose each other's perspectives or stance of views, much contested issue on much contested issues around macroeconomic perspective and many public finance approach. So we need to be conscious on those matters. It is therefore important to debate and discuss our office successes and development matters within the context of respecting each other's offices, independence, and sovereignty as well. We have many countries, as Dr. Masini has listed them, entities, and also many colleagues attending virtually, and I'm very, very happy, and the network is very excited, the council is very excited and happy, and really that shows that this will be a very great conference indeed. And I want to thank you so much once more, and I wish you the best conference. Thank you so much. Asante. Thank you so much. I'm also supposed to introduce the clerk of the National Assembly to come up here. Double job I'm doing. Thank you so much. I would also like to take this opportunity once more to thank Honorable Mr. Samuel Njoroge. Just to make sure I get it right. Njoroge, the opportunity to come and brief us. Thank you so much. Asante.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague.
Mr. Jantes, you do not pronounce my name well, so please forgive me if I don't pronounce you as well, and I will deliberately not pronounce it well. Mr. Jantes. The Honorable Chairperson of Parliamentary Budget Office, the Honorable Chairperson of Budget and Appropriations Committee, the Honorable Didi Nyoro, who also today doubles up as representative of the Speaker of the National Assembly and Chairperson of the Parliamentary Service Commission, my distinguished colleague, the Clerk of the Senate, the Secretary of Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Dumisani Jantis, Chairperson of ANPBO, our very own Dr. Masinde, who is also our host this morning, members of the Governing Council of ANPBO, distinguished resource persons present physically and those who are present virtually, guests from various countries, fellow delegates, parliamentary staff, good morning. I'm delighted to be the third person to speak to you today, not just to welcome you to this 6th workshop of a network of parliamentary budget officers from across Africa, but also to share some thoughts as a parliamentary officer. I am notified that the theme of this workshop is the role of parliamentary budget offices in African Parliament, fiscal oversight, contribution to Africa's development agenda, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to make a few remarks. You know, Dr. Masinde, I note yours, you know, clerkship has Society of Clerks at the table. So that's a society. It has a national chapter, the African chapter, and in Kenya, we have our own local chapter. Legal Council, theirs, they call it a colloquium of Legal Council, which was birthed here at home, and now it's a big entity. Hansard officers have a society, and yours, you decided to call it a network. And so, Daktari, I was asking myself, you had to look for a term that distinguishes you from the rest. It could not be a society, an association, but a web, a network of parliamentary budget offices. And I'm again notified that our neighbors, Uganda, are the pioneers in this field. Where is Uganda? They are pioneers in this field. They pioneered. We followed. I don't know whether we have overtaken you or we are still catching up. It's possible we are still catching up. But I don't know what we could have done if we didn't have a parliamentary budget office, at least in Kenya. Every time as a clerk I receive a document on my table, and it has something macro, fiscal, estimate, my first place of call is Parliamentary Budget Office. And we do not confuse a Parliamentary Budget Office from the internal capacity of finance and accounts. We don't. We know what is for Parliamentary Budget Office, and we know what is for internal consumption. And the beauty, Honorable Chairperson of Budget and Appropriations Committee, the beauty of this kind of networks, the beauty of this kind of engagement is that they give us an opportunity to share ideas, to share lessons, and to reflect. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to enjoy on behalf of Kenyans splendid and lavish welcome that was given to me and the rest of the delegation from Africa when we were invited to South Africa for salsa. Salsa is not the dance, how I wish it was. It is a society of secretaries of parliaments of South Africa, the national, and the 9 provinces. And we had a good time there. And while there, I learned that we are one. We share many problems, we share many opportunities. Clark Nyegenye, one of the things we are all taken to court about is public participation. And while there, I was agonizing about our finance bill case, which was in court. And I thought we were in problems until when colleagues from South Africa started speaking about, there's a case you called Constance Mogale case versus the Speaker of the National Assembly and 9 others. 9 others includes 8 of the 9 provinces, and I'm sure your National Council of Provinces. In that case, an act called the Traditional Khoisan Leaders Act was declared unconstitutional for want of public participation. I thought that we are the only ones who have public participation in the constitution. South Africa also has land, and theirs is a little bit more elaborate. And if we had provisions closer to yours, I doubt we'll be passing any bill in this country. That particular act was declared unconstitutional for a number of things. The Constitutional Court said it did not meet the constitutional threshold for public participation for a number of parameters. One of them, which I found to be very strange, is that there were no sufficient copies of the bill given to the communities. We don't even give 5 to communities. We put it on the website. We publish a notification in the newspapers. But we do not produce physical copies for the people. The other ground was that there was no sufficient pre-public participation education. I said, really? Parliament to educate the people before you go there for public participation? Another one, which I thought again was strange, is that the copies of the bill were not translated in the local languages, and where they were translated, translation missed the point. I said, Jesus, we only have English and Swahili in this country. Of course, all our laws, all our bills are in English. An attempt to translate a bill from English into Swahili, I doubt we would go any far. Yet, there's a country where a law is declared unconstitutional for want of translation. That translators missed a few things. And then finally, there was a political aspect that politicians, when they went to do public participation, they gave more prominence to traditional leaders and forgot the people. It was declared unconstitutional. I think they were given, is it 1 year, to attempt to do something about it. My point is, the more we interact, the more we network, the more we realize that others have problems too, and that we can learn a lot from them. And that we also have opportunities as individual nations, that we are probably ahead in a number of things that we thought that we are not doing well. So karibuni sana, once again, colleagues from and distinguished guests from the different countries. I've had a cursory look at the conference program, and I note with great satisfaction that is not only appropriate but also quite enriching and gives us an opportunity for us to share ideas. The content will unveil great topical discussion
that will allow sharing of experiences, and that will strengthen budget oversight capabilities of all delegates here present today. Allow me from the onset to laud the tremendous work that parliamentary budget offices all over the continent and physical bureaucrats, those from the counties, do with respect to helping legislators and even us as administrators to understand work related to budget. Traditionally, as was said by our speaker in the video clip, budget making was seen as an area for the executive only, exclusive to the executive, and the executive would send treasury, we used to call them treasury, mandarins to parliaments to scare off politicians with big words of macro, micro, fiscal, statistics of changes in interest rates. And during our days, we could only change the budget by a small margin. Could not increase, but could only reduce by, was it 20 pounds? 20 pounds only, I mean, which is meaningless. Of course, with the advent of the new constitution, the entrenchment of parliamentary budget office in law, we have moved far. And what comes to my mind is, what else are we missing? Suppose we missed the bus of parliamentary budget office when it was passing. We would be very behind. Is it possible that as African parliaments, national and provinces and counties, that the other professional aspects that we are missing, because we have not taken time either to establish them in law or simply to establish them administratively? It is possible. Because before PBO was established, we didn't know really that we are missing what we have today. And we are lucky that we founded ours in law that time, early enough. Immediately passed our new constitution. The next thing was to do a PBO. If we didn't do it then, probably Dr. Masinde, we will be very far behind. I have no doubt we'll be very far behind. The steps that we are making in our national parliament with respect to budget making, the influence parliament has today on the national pass, the respect that the institution of parliament has received from the executive, the judiciary, and the public when it comes to budget making. It's largely because of the professionals within parliamentary square that advise the politicians and administrators on the content of the budget. Now we are able to speak with authority. We are able to cite publications done by our own officers with authority, and we are able to give examples of what is happening elsewhere in the African continent. Our PBO has grown thanks to the Parliamentary Service Commission from a small entity of 2 officers to almost 50 professionals today. 50 in a span of a very short period. The challenge on us as administrators is how to keep those professionals engaged and how to make them feel that they are having meaningful impact on the society. Because it's not sufficient for you to come up with good analysis and then that analysis ends up in the library. That analysis has to find itself in policy, has to find itself in bills, and has to impact on the national economy. For colleagues from Uganda, you might be shocked to learn that Treasury consults our Parliamentary Budget Office our National Treasury consults our Parliamentary Budget Office every now and then, sometimes asking that we loan them the expertise that we have when we are doing estimates, when we are considering debt papers, because they know that we have, Parliament has good capacity, Parliament has been able to attract and retain, they make a call or write, say, can you loan us a few officers to help us during this process, so that when the paper comes to Parliament, we are all on the same page. Sometimes it means they are afraid of the expertise that we have, and they would want the experts to be with them when they are doing the paper. Because we are one country, we are one government, sometimes we loan those officers to them, because they also used to loan officers to us. But sometimes we are jealous. Say, we would want to keep ours for now, so that you do your thing, and then we'll be able to look at it when it comes. So I am grateful to our Parliamentary Service Commission for the ability to grow our PBO that far. And thanks to the constitutional change in the history of our country, when the power of the public purse changed from the executive to the legislature, initially, when that change happened, we didn't know what to do. We were not sure that we'll be able to match the expertise that there is in the executive. But today we are proud, and we are growing, Dr. Masinde. We will continue supporting you. We will continue supporting you locally and also assisting you to network with the rest in Africa and beyond. The whole area of budget making is regarded by many to not only be complex but also technical, heavy laden with economics and finance, and not forgetting the fact that the work is robustly analytical in nature. On the flip side, legislators across the globe are drawn from different fields. They come from different disciplines, they come from different areas, and it's our business as administrators, it's our business as experts to assist legislators understand their role, particularly in budget making. The statement of the old American Revolution comes into mind here, that no taxation without representation. Therefore, the voices of the people through their representative must be heard even on budget matters. And this is where you come in as parliamentary budget officers. You take on a pivotal role to midwife and simplify the process to your respective legislators, who are subsequently able to not only understand their mandates, but also improve the use of budget as a tool to ensure that the aspirations and concerns of citizens whom they represent are taken into consideration when making the budget. As Jacob Law stated, a budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of values and aspirations. I've looked again at the various thematic areas for presentations and discussion during this workshop, and I am satisfied that it will meet its objectives. Issues such as public debt and debt vulnerabilities, I notice, will be discussed, and the somewhat worrying trends of macroeconomic outlook of the world, while devising ways to approach and analyze the macroeconomic challenges of inflation, interest rates, and exchange rate volatilities, coupled with policy concerns on food security and climate change imperatives. Colleagues, these are the things that are being discussed today. After the COVID-19 pandemic and the financial crisis that we are going through as a universe, the problems between Russia and its neighbor, what concerns most nations today is inflation, it is interest rates, it is exchange rate volatilities, and their effects on the national economies. When you open our newspaper, the Business Daily, every day, it's about how is our shilling performing relative to the dollar, and what is causing that to happen. The other day, we were being told that the shilling in Kenya may get affected by the policy of oil importation. The government to government, or they call them the OMCs, because of the stress either of those policies have on the local currency. And we got assurance from the government that all is okay. But we can only, as officers who work in Parliament and politicians who listen to our Parliamentary Budget Office, we get satisfaction when we hear our Parliamentary Budget Office telling us things are okay. Don't worry, things are okay. If Treasury says things are okay and PBO says things are not okay, we have a reason to worry. If both PBO and Treasury says things are okay, then we relax and we know there's no need to worry. Those who have a few dollars, you don't have to worry keeping them. You can sell them. And that's it. I'm happy to observe that there will be discussion on the topic on money bills, which is a topic that in our Parliament, like Senate, agree with me that is that one area that we are yet to fully legislate on, we are yet to fully acclimatize with. There are those who feel that a money bill is any bill that has a financial implication, even if it's a bill to create an entity to control and manage cancer, right? So long as it has a board in it, is it the expenditure people? The expenditure people will, right, will say that will have an expense on budget. That will mean an expense on budget. People will be paid allowances. There are those who take a strict meaning of money bill, that a money bill is a bill like a finance bill, an appropriation bill, an equalization appropriation bill, a bill that means to allow the executive to dip its hand into the consolidated fund, a bill that speaks to taxation. We are still there. The two houses of Parliament, we have been engaging, and I think we are better off today than we were a few years ago, because we have come of age. We realize that we do not have to fight over small things. You know, there's something called narcissism of small things, and you engage in unnecessary war over definitions. And I think we have moved on, and I would be waiting to hear from you what is a conventional definition of a money bill. From an administrative point of view, mainstreaming participatory budgeting in line with constitutional safeguards and requirements, as well as best practices, including proper analysis of public input in the public budget processes, remain priority to my office. And to this end, I once again, before you, want to give my personal and official commitment to supporting Parliamentary Budget Office to achieve its objectives, Dr. Masinde and your team. I recall when you walked to the office and indicated that you are going to host this network. Initially I asked, why a network? I mean, why not an association? Why? And you convinced us, and we agreed. And because also the chair of Parliamentary Budget, the chair of Budget and Appropriations Committee understands these things, he easily agreed to facilitating when we were doing the estimates to ensure that we are able to host this workshop. and that is just one in many, so that we don't leave the burden to ladies and gentlemen from South Africa to be hosting us every now and then. It's not that we would mind coming there, but we would also want you to stay in Kenya, to come to Kenya again and again and again for these kind of networks. Allow me, colleagues, to wrap up by giving a few challenges to us. One of them, we just spoke earlier on the video, is the need for us to stay being innovative and creative. Innovative and creative. Why we will be left behind as institutions is if we sit and relax simply because we are being paid a wage or a salary and spend time simply doing PowerPoints. The world today is rewarding, the world today is gifting those who innovate, those who give ideas from zero to something. The world is rewarding institutions that originate ideas, institutions that are creative. And I want to challenge us to be creative, to change with times. Secondly, may I challenge us to provide solutions. Houses of Parliament, we are accustomed to criticizing. We are accustomed to waiting for a bill to come, then we can criticize sometimes. We are accustomed to waiting for a budget to come, then we can critique the budget. That is not primarily what we should be doing. Why not provide alternatives? Why not provide solutions? When we tell the executive, you cannot borrow, let's remind ourselves that we are also part of government. We tell the executive, hey, you are borrowing too much, stop borrowing. So the head of the executive will ask you, so what? So what should I do? Let us be part of the solution so that we are able to give alternatives. So that we are not looked at as the enemy, the entity that only waits to criticize, the entity that is only good at poking holes. Thirdly, I persuade us to approach our work with simplicity. Let us simplify the language that we use when we are discussing budget matters with politicians. You know, the consumers of our work, consumers of our product, is a politician who is a busy being, and the public. If we become too inundated with big words, macro, micro, and the other words that follow, changes of interest rates, arbitrage, we lose our audience. Let us understand it. We speak that language when we are together as PBO officers and bureaucrats. But when we are speaking to politicians, if we want politicians to understand and carry us along, let us simplify our language. Let us simplify. Let us not appear too sophisticated or complex. Fourthly, is it possible for us to create a nexus between what we do and the people? In my 22 years experience as a parliamentary officer, I have learned that one of the ways of getting into the heart of a politician is to create a nexus between what you are proposing and the people that they represent. They will listen to you. You will carry them with you. You'll most likely have marketed your idea that, hey, you will solve the problems of dams in this country if we do the following in the budget. And when you solve the problems of dams, this will happen to your people. That will solve the problem of repairs in schools, public primary schools, elementary schools and colleges, if we do the following in budget. When we create a nexus between budget making process and the people, we carry along our principal client, who is a member of parliament. Fifth, is it possible for us to look for, I call it competing for legislative space. Remember, the consumer of our work also has other things to do. The member for Kiharu was not elected to make budget. That's not the only thing he was elected to do. He's supposed to represent his people, to make laws, to engage in deliberative motions in the House, to vet people for appointments, and of course, to engage in politics, which we are unable to teach them. The last one, we are unable to teach them. They can only teach us. But the others, we can be able to engage and have a discourse. Because they have this myriad of responsibilities, you have to compete for legislative space for you to find an entry. Currently, I think the only time we really engage, in Kenya, the only time we really engage members of parliament is doing estimates. It is when we are doing estimates, am I right? That is the main estimate or supplementary. At time we are able to get into the airspace. A bit when we are doing the budget policy statement. Budget implementation, am I right, Dr. Masinde? When we are looking at budget implementation, we don't get any legislative space. And it's time we compete, because we have to compete with bills. The same committees which are supposed to oversight and follow up budget implementation, the same committee that I will be telling, hey, where is your report on bills? So you got to compete for space and determine when is the right time to do what. May I also urge you, finally, not to be left behind in the traditional Westminster way of doing things. Our society is evolving with each passing moment. I ask you to keep abreast with the changing times. Be in time, colleagues. This workshop comes at a time when Kenya is hosting two international meetings. One is the Africa Climate Summit. The second one is Africa Climate Week, both happening at the same time. And our president, our executive are staying current, because the current issues is about global warming, it's about climate change. And I've seen one of the topics and one of the key subjects being discussed is climate financing, carbon trading. Is it time we look at is it not time we look at what component of carbon trading can become part of budget financing? Because that is where the world is moving to, at least when it comes to climate change. So keep abreast with the changing times and move with times. Be the ones to originate these ideas also. In conclusion, I ask you to endeavor to develop strong, informal working relationships at all levels, because the importance of human element cannot be overemphasized in parliamentary budget, research and technical fellowship, and I urge you to balance this by equally prioritizing to focus on the work-life balance equation. To the Governing Council, my charges to you is that you expand the Council's network across Africa, inculcate technical training in legislative budget oversight, and also ensure sustainability of the Council through robust membership, while also incentivizing publications and empirical research and analysis. Finally, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I invite you, I leave you with the words of Robin Sharma, that an ordinary life is all about daily, continuous improvements in that area. Go on and be extraordinary. Thank you very much. Allow me, colleagues, now to invite my distinguished colleague and friend, the Clerk of the Senate of the Republic of Kenya. Mr. Jeremiah Nyegenye also doubles up as the Secretary of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Karibu.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my brother, Clerk of the National Assembly, Mr. Samuel Njoroge. Thank you for that introduction and your kind words, and for your treatise on parliamentary budget offices and the work that they do. I had brought along a fairly hefty document that was going to be the basis of my discussion, but as you spoke, I was cancelling out what you have spoken to, and now I am left with half a page from what I had before. So the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, our chief guest, represented here by the Chairman of the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly, the Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, my colleague clerk of the National Assembly, Mr. Samuel Njoroge, the Chairman, and this is one of the things I will be speaking to. If you want to be taken seriously as an organization, you cannot exercise the austerity you call on governments to and be economical with your terminologies. Who has chairman anymore? These days we are president. And why are you still holding a conference? We in the legal circles, we hold a colloquium. So we are not going to be, you know, sometimes the professions in which we work inspire our whole outlook of life. So while you are austere and economical with your titles and whatever, we are flamboyant. So, Mr. President of the Governing Council, that's one of the changes you will make to your charter, the network of Parliamentary Budget Office, Mr. Dumisani Jantis, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Nobody is there? Is anybody there? So I hope I have done some justice to the pronunciation. I don't know what all that was about, Mr. Masinde, struggling with Hauteng. And you come from the Luhya community in Kenya, which is the one community that has no difficulty with ha. So anyway, it's a great pleasure for me and my singular honor to join you today, and I was very happy to hear all the introductions from all the various jurisdictions that you come from, reminding me of how we established, in another life I was working as head of legal in the Parliament of Kenya, and this takes me to the time when we established the colloquium of legal counsel. We are now, I think, in the 12th year. And so beginnings like this, and I mean the kind of evolution that you're going through is very exciting to me, to hear all the introductions, to hear everyone from the various jurisdictions. I also had an interesting introduction by Mr. Major, retired Masinde, who said that because the Sergeant at Arms, we are safe. The person after that was a guy from finance. And I thought that was the one who makes us safe. So I am very pleased to join you in this unique forum, which provides you and provides all of us with the opportunity to share knowledge, to share experiences on the services which technical experts like yourselves provide across the continent. And I think that it is a very good opportunity for us to discuss contemporary issues, best practices on matters budget, matters finance, matters economy across our countries. And I want to join my brother, the Clerk of the Assembly, and Mr. Masinde, Director, Budget Office, whom I also recognize, in welcoming all of you to Kenya and to our Parliament. And we are honored that you agreed and you chose our country to be the host of the 6th annual conference of PBOs. Karibuni, and we hope that you will enjoy your time here. It's a good thing to hold this here, but one of the shortcomings of that, of course, is that you may not be able to visit Parliament. Make it a point whenever you go to brother legislatures, sister legislatures, to visit the Parliament. So it's a bit, I think we have some difficulty with some echo. So I want to recognize the growing need of experts to serve across parliaments as a way of giving alternative views from those that are advanced by the executive. This idea has now taken root and is replicated in various disciplines. We now have parliamentary budget offices such as the ones which you represent, joining a growing number of other professional cadres. We have, in addition to the traditional cadres such as clerks, sergeant-at-arms, we have newer cadres in legislatures such as legal counsel, such as media professionals, such as researchers. Parliamentary budget offices across the continent have been established against a backdrop of weak legislative performance and inadequate effective scrutiny and oversight over the budget process by legislatures. While the executive has had and has always had at its beck and call a team of technocrats to assist in the drafting and interpretation of the budget, it has all been rather complex for legislatures to adequately scrutinize and understand budgets. And from that perspective, then, we had a situation where legislatures played a peripheral role on matters budget, so that the role of legislatures became limited to just going along and passing the budget, making minimal changes, not adequately participating. I don't know about all of you, but I would imagine, at least in the East African region, when the budget has been read by the ministers of budget, who come with a little bag or and go and read the speeches for about 2 hours. It's usually very long. And then after that, the media is always waiting out there to meet members of parliament and to ask them, so what do you think of the budget? And usually there are some words that you expect. It's balanced. Or some people say it's a common man's budget. When you hear some of this terminology, I think it's just a euphemism for saying I didn't understand it. So this is what is sought to be avoided by the advent of parliamentary budget offices having the personnel, having the competence to assist legislatures to properly engage and understand the budget. Africa has adopted the Agenda 2063 as our economic blueprint, towards eradicating poverty in the continent, and in the coming decades, through enhanced investment in productive capacities of our people, improving incomes, creating jobs, and providing basic necessities of life. This goal can only be achieved through sound policy interventions translated into budget, which is an integral part of the mandate of parliamentary budget offices. Your role in a legislative setup cannot therefore be gainsaid. Your mission is to help our parliaments to make effective budget and economic policy choices. In carrying out this mandate, you need to offer alternative information or policy options to what the executive provides. Legislatures in different African countries provide different, they play different roles in the budget formulation process, some being more actively involved than others. Despite these variations, the role of that the legislature plays has changed over time and will continue to change. These changing roles, distinguished delegates, call into question the sources of information that are made available to assist the legislature in the budget process. I have no doubt in my mind that legislatures will continue to require reliable and biased information to be able to participate in this policy discourse in a constructive manner and in examining budgets and accompanying documentation. The work of parliamentary budget officers, and by extension any other office within the legislature, requires officers to carry out their duties with professionalism, fairness, independence, non-partisanship in the provision of services to members of parliament. I implore you to exercise impartiality and provide even-handed support to parliaments, particularly parliaments with bicameral setup. My brother, the clerk of the assembly, spoke about money bills and spoke about the challenges that in our jurisdiction we have had. As professionals, you need to recognize that what you do matters. And I have argued that a bad parliamentary budget office is worse than none at all. You better have none than have a bad one. Because if you have a bad one, you could as well be packaging, sealing, and delivering the legislature back to the executive. By how you appreciate, by how you understand, by how you interpret the various provisions of financial legislation, the various provisions of the Constitution, you may very well be strengthening the hand of the executive at the expense of the legislature. To take as an alternative question of money bill, we all understand that the definition of money bill has as its end the determination of the role that the executive will play in the processing of legislation and the role that the legislature will play. Therefore, an interpretation that inclines towards making everything a money bill obviously strengthens the hand of the executive at the expense of the legislature. Of course, this will differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in our jurisdiction, the definition of money bill is a constitutional one. The definition is in the Constitution. So it's not about whim, it's not about preference, it is founded in constitutional text. Networks like this provide avenues for officers also to develop their capacities. I understand that the work of economists, who are the major professionals domiciled in PBOs, involves macro forecasting, tax forecasting. I promised myself I would also use big words. So budget analysis, policy analysis. Where is a place I will use volatility, which involves extensive usage of data. ANPBO, the African Network PBOs, therefore should come up with other seminars which are more targeted also to training and professional development to enable our officers, our PBOs across the continent to improve on analytical skills and help us as a continent to achieve Agenda 2063 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I have looked at the topics that you are set to discuss as well, ranging from Africa's economic transformation through fairer multilateral lending to boosting domestic revenues to support economic transformation, among other topics, which I think are critical for us. I hope that these discussions will help us cross-pollinate and take back home important lessons so that we help our continent on the path of economic prosperity. As we move forward, I will be hoping, and my contribution to you today would be to challenge you also, because this is the 6th conference. It may well be that what I speak about is something you talked about or you thought about in the first conference or the second or the third or previous ones. But if it isn't, or even if it is, it may be useful that this continues to be a discussion you have at each and every of your conferences. Because I speak as a client, as an administrator of Parliament, working as a clerk of the Senate. I also speak as a client, and a lot of your topics are useful and very important, but they are not. You are not looking at this from the point of view of the client. And as a client, I will invite you in this conference and in others to think about basics. The basics, the very basics. Maybe you thought about them before. And those basics, that's the danger of inviting a lay person like myself to a discourse of intellectuals. The program is littered with PhDs, doctor this, doctor the other. My contribution is a lay one. So I want to ask a few questions, which may sound elementary, but which I think will be useful to you even as you go on. Never lose sight of this, which is, some of these questions include, what is a parliamentary budget office? Seems like an easy question. When is a parliamentary budget office a parliamentary budget office? In other words, what are the elements that make a parliamentary budget office befitting of a place at this table? Is it everyone who says they are a parliamentary budget office that merits you an invitation to sit at this discourse? Who should be expelled? Are there building blocks of a parliamentary budget office? What is parliamentary about a parliamentary budget office? Is it the funding? Is it the patronage? Is it the point of view that you advance? Because a parliamentary budget office also still operates in a superstructure of a country as a whole. And so while you provide information and data to assist parliaments, it doesn't follow also that it is adversarial to other organs of the state. So what's parliamentary about parliamentary budget office? What structures support a proper parliamentary budget office? Because this is the benchmarking and peerage that you should be having to support one another to be able to realize real outfits that make a real change. Because how you are structured, how you are funded, the level of professional autonomy that you have, the interlinkages with the rest of parliamentary administration could affect in large measure what you are able to achieve. Because we must never sit on our laurels. We must never think that we have come to the place we wanted to be merely because we have established an office. It is how that office then operates. It is what we can learn from the challenges that we face on a daily basis. It's what we can learn from how others have established and what challenges they face. A parliamentary budget office should constantly challenge orthodoxies. Echoing in some sense the words of my brother, the clerk of the National Assembly. Because sometimes as Africans, and Africa is our business, those who are from Kenya understand we are Africans and Africa is our business. Sometimes we can regurgitate concepts and principles, you know, and high-sounding pomposities which we borrow from others. And this is not a preserve of budget office or economists. Virtually all professions sometimes fall into this. What new contribution, what new knowledge do we actually bring to the table? There must be new knowledge, there must be something new that resonates with our context, with our situation, that allows us the right to remain where we are. I like to give the example of the visas you sometimes get to the jurisdictions that you visit. Some visas say that you have a right to enter and remain. So you have entered. When you work in Parliament, when you have come in, you have entered. But the right to remain must be earned. And it is earned by the contribution that you make on a daily basis to in the work that you do. Having always as an end the good governance, the prosperity, the safety, the comfort of the people as the object. What we are doing is not abstract, it's not theoretical, it has an end. That end is just governance. That end is the peace, the prosperity of our people. Do you see yourselves as contributing in that every day? Because that is what we must do at all times. Challenge of simplicity, I don't know. There is a fondness I have for the papers that are done by the Parliamentary Budget Office, our Parliamentary Budget Office. They're very nice to read. So simplicity is good. I want to understand, but I also like, Mr. Masinda, I also like how, I mean, there are terms of art, surely, which I don't know that you can depart from. But you could cut down a little on the jargons and the complexities, but keep some of that flavor. I think I really do enjoy your papers. So as I come to an end, I want to congratulate you, the council, led by your president, for this noble idea of coming together and forming the network. I think that you can benchmark from, and I invite you freely, okay, not freely, we are, I will be happy to consult for you as you benchmark with other organizations that are set up. Now we have an association for researchers. We have one for Sergeant at Arms, been running a long time. We have one for Hansard, been running a long time. We have one for Legal Counsel, which, as I said, I'm honored to have been associated with, now running since 2011. Some thoughts you will have to, I think, consider include the sustainability of the organization in terms of its funding arrangements. And you are budget people, you should know things cost something and things have to be paid for, and you can't load that on South Africa to host on each occasion. There may be subscriptions. You may need to consider a standing secretariat of some kind. Otherwise, continuity becomes a challenge, and you meet at a conference and in between nothing is happening. You may want to consider publications so that throughout the year something is running and people contribute into the body of knowledge. Of course, continuous professional development, I've spoken to that. But overall, I am pleased, I'm very pleased to have joined you. Help others, mentorship, think through mentorship, think through helping others to set up. When I was coming to the event, I asked how many countries are represented. And I think I was told 10 or thereabout, running to 13. And I will be happier to attend the next conference or to hear that we have now in our stable, we now have 40 or 45. We need to help. But part of that will be some of the questions that I have asked you. Because once we know who we are or who we want to be, then it becomes easier to set up. I am looking forward to very exciting deliberations here, and I am wishing all of you a very good time at this event. Thank you very much for your attention. Asanteni sana. May I use the opportunity then, which is my singular honor and privilege, to invite our chief guest, the Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, the chairman of our Budget and Appropriations Committee, representing the Speaker of the National Assembly. Shall we be upstanding and applaud the chief guest? He's responsible for the money, you know. Please. Please.
Thank you very much, our Senate Clerk, Bwana Jeremiah Nyegenye. I'll do two things. One, I will want to represent the Speaker in his own words, without a lot of my interjections, so that then I take a few more minutes afterwards to give my thoughts, which will be brief, because I've gone through the program and I see actually the next one in line is actually our domain as parliamentarians, giving our feedback insofar as our interaction with PBOs is concerned. But before I do that, starting with the Speaker's remarks, I want to agree with the National Assembly Clerk, Bwana Joroge, and also our Senate Clerk, Bwana Nyegenye, in terms of simplicity and using words that are not very complex. And maybe I'll start there by giving a small remark by trying to be simple and talk about the current stagflation across the world has been caused by qualitative easing and monetary easing, ceteris paribus. We must try to be as simple as that, Bwana Masinde. I am very happy to be representing our Speaker, who is also my very good friend and our senior, and the Clerk of the National Assembly, Mr. Samuel Joroge, the Clerk of the Senate, who is also the Secretary of the Parliamentary Service Commission, the Chairperson of the Governing Council of the African Networks of Parliamentary Budget Offices, Dr. Dumisani, elected Governing Council officials. Of course, I'm sure our doctor is there, Martin. Distinguished resource persons, staff of the National Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Parliament of the Republic of Kenya, and on my own behalf, I welcome you all to the great city of Mombasa for the 6th annual conference for the African Network of Parliamentary Budget Offices. This is the first time for Kenya to host this conference, and we are thrilled to have this opportunity to share our experiences in this journey towards enhancing parliamentary fiscal oversight. May you all enjoy the hospitality of Kenyans, and more so, those of our coastal brothers and sisters. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to see this meeting of great minds that constitute delegates from development partners, delegates from the IMF, the World Bank, scholars, and parliamentary budget officers from Africa, whose ultimate purpose is to leverage the power of the purse in parliaments across the African continent as a key factor governing the policy decisions of governments. When Kenya attained independence in 1963, the parliament that came into force was subservient to the executive. Indeed, up until the year 2000, the Parliament of the Republic of Kenya was a department of the office, only the office of the President, competing with other government agencies for resources and receiving instructions from the Presidency. As a result, despite the existence of an estimates committee in Parliament, whose mandate was to examine the budget estimates and make recommendations to the House, the skewed power balance ensured that Parliament remained a rubber stamp, simply providing legitimacy to the decisions of the executive while exerting little or no influence in these decisions. This situation was replicated in many post-independent regimes across Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come a long way since then. For Kenya, the wind of change really gained momentum following the repeal of Section 2A of the previous constitution in 1991, which allowed for the country to become a multi-party state. Members of Parliament who were increasingly dissatisfied with the status quo became more outspoken on budget matters and started pushing for the budget to be discussed in the Estimates Committee before being brought to the House. As you'd expect, this bold demand led to the deletion in November 1997 of the standing order establishing the Estimates Committee in order, of course, to silence the members of Parliament whom the executive felt were asking too many questions. The members of Parliament did not give up. In 2005, Parliament passed a resolution to establish a Fiscal Analysis and Appropriations Committee, whose mandate was similar to that of the abolished Estimates Committee. However, the fact that it was just a sessional committee and was not recognized in the standing orders hindered its progress. In 2006, a motion and subsequently the Fiscal Management Bill brought into existence the Fiscal Analysis and Appropriations Committee with specialized staff under the Office of the Fiscal Analyst, that is the OFA, to provide technical support to this committee. Unfortunately, the Fiscal Management Bill 2006 lapsed with the dissolution of the 9th Parliament after having reached the second reading stage. Ladies and gentlemen, in the words of Victor Hugo, you can resist an invading army, but you cannot resist an idea whose time has come. The idea of establishing a parliamentary budget office in Kenya was unstoppable. In 2008, the Fiscal Management Bill was reintroduced in Parliament and finally enacted into law in 2009. This act established the Budget Committee and the Parliamentary Budget Office. Further, a review of the standing orders in 2008 reorganized the procedure of budget approval in Parliament, allowing the legislature to undertake a more visible role in budget making. The promulgation of our new constitution in 2010 and the passing into law of the Public Finance Management Act in 2012 further entrenched the role of Parliament in the budget-making process, with the legislature's power of the purse gaining more prominence. I am happy to inform you that since its inception, our BPO, that is the Parliamentary Budget Office, has grown into leaps and bounds and currently occupies a central role or position as an nonpartisan professional office of Parliament of the Republic of Kenya, providing professional services in respect of budget, finance, and economic information to the committees of Parliament. With the support of PBO, Parliament continues to play an increasingly visible role in the budget process due to increased access to credible information provided by the Parliamentary Budget Office. Parliament can now exercise some considerable degree of influence over the outcome of the national budget and can also effectively influence policy outcomes. This is no mean feat for a Parliament which less than 2 decades ago could not query a single budget line without invoking the wrath of the executive. It has been protracted and torturous journey, but the outcome is worth its weight in gold. I have had the privilege of occupying a front row seat of these developments, having served as a member of Parliament. Of course, I'm sure you understand it's the Speaker, in various capacities from 1993 to present today. I can tell you from experience that since the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office, the contribution of members of Parliament to public discourse, as well in the plenary sessions of the House on matters of the national budget and economic policy, has become more and more sophisticated to the extent that executive now listens to and incorporates their feedback into the country's policy decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to observe that the existence of the PBO in parliaments across the African continent is becoming the norm rather than the exception. This is a step in the right direction, as it will go a long way into ensuring that parliaments across Africa are key actors in addressing Africa's development challenges. This primary role of the legislature is to represent the people. Entrenching Parliament in the budget process ensures that the voice of the people is carried through in key policy decisions and, of course, decisions and outcomes. The public is also increasingly aware that they cannot continue to be bystanders in decisions that affect their livelihoods. Consequently, they have continued to agitate by themselves and through their members of Parliament for a seat in the table of policy making and resource sharing. In this regard, the Parliamentary Budget Office acts as a compass for the members of Parliament to facilitate them to make informed decisions for the citizens. The theme of this conference, that is the role of PBOs in African Parliament's physical oversight, contribution to the African Development Agenda. PBO do not exist as an aid to themselves, but to support Parliament in oversighting the government's stewardship of public funds. This can be a perilous undertaking, particularly in environments where democracy and the rule of law is not fully established. I urge the delegates gathered in this room today to provide objective, non-partisan information in the quest to support the budget process. Continue making bold decisions for the sake of your countries, even when the odds are stacked up against you. There is an English saying that I wish to quote thus: dripping water hollows out stone, not through force, but through persistence. Change does not come easily, but if you persist long and hard enough, focusing on the prevailing challenges and chipping away slowly at them, eventually you will find a way through or around it. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Speaker of the National Assembly, I believe the same applies to your respective speakers. I play the role of an umpire who ensures that in the decision-making process of the House, members drawn from divergent political parties are not only empowered but also heard during the plenary sessions when the budget discussion ensue. There is need for parliaments across the globe to gauge the impact of fiscal measures approved by the respective houses if we are to contribute to African development agenda, as our theme is. I understand that some legislatures are at different stages of establishing such advisory offices with varying degree and scope of fiscal analysis and budget oversight, as well as the human resource complement. I wish those starting the journey the very best, and I welcome them for regular benchmarking and study to the National Assembly, of course, in Kenya. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I want to urge you to continue to develop and harness collegiality among yourselves as professionals. Having this network is very important, and you will arrive at the resounding conclusion that PBOs are universal in nature in spite of geographical and political differences. To the Governing Council of the ANPBO, the chairman who comes from South Africa, and the Secretary General who is our very own, Dr. Maside, be encouraged to recruit more parliaments in this network to spur its growth. The growth of the network will greatly increase the sense of solidarity among member delegates as well as areas of work, and this will allow you to leverage on different experts across Africa and the world. Allow me to also throw a final challenge to you. Consider having your respective speakers to be your patrons on a rotational basis. Let me repeat that. Allow me to also throw a final challenge to you. Consider having your respective speakers to be your patrons on a rotational basis. Let us ask ourselves whether that would be beneficial or whether that will work. It is my sincere hope that at the end of this conference, we will not only have learned from each other's experiences, but also harness a collective resolve and strategy to propel African parliaments to the next frontier of legislative budget oversight. This will truly entrench the voice of the people in the budget-making process. Ladies and gentlemen, with those remarks, it is now my pleasant duty and privilege to declare the 6th Annual Conference of the African Network of Parliamentary Budget Offices officially open. That is from our Speaker, the Right Honorable Dr. Moses Wetangula, who is also EGH and MP, the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Chairperson of the Parliamentary Service Commission. The reason why I have decided to open the session officially is so that my other few remarks will be within the session. I fear for the speakers who spoke before me, because I don't know which forum you were addressing. Anyway, thank you very much, and I am definitely very pleased. I am very pleased to be here this morning. Again, my name is Dede Nyoro, MP for a place called Kiharu constituency, and I am a second-time member of Parliament. I am also very happy to be serving our Republic as the chairperson of the Budget and Appropriations Committee in the National Assembly in Kenya. In Kenya, that committee is made up of 27 members. It used to be much bigger, around 51, but now we are at 27. And just for the members, other partners of other member states to understand, Kenya has 3 committees that would sit as Budget and Appropriations Committee. In fact, previously, these committees were 1. It used to be the Budget Committee, the Budget Committee that I serve. There is another one called Finance Committee, and there is another one called the Debt and Privatization Committee. The Budget and Appropriations Committee deals singularly with the expenditure side of our budget. The other 2 deal with the revenue side. The finance is the one that actually brings the finance bill on the floor of the House. The Finance Committee is responsible for where money comes from. And when there is a deficit, then the Debt and Privatization Committee fills in the gap. And therefore in Kenya, the Budget and Appropriations Committee on the expenditure side, the demand side of money, but the Finance Committee and also the Debt and Privatization Committee is on the supply side of money. And they are very, very busy committees, and I don't actually know how we will be operating if all the 3 committees were actually rounded up in one. So it eases our work, it makes our work more efficient. Allow me, because I am fish in water when we are talking about economic issues, I feel very much at home, to just share some brief remarks, and especially looking at Africa in general. When I look at Africa or our countries, I look at Africa in 3 dimensions, and that is what every other modern state looks at themselves. One is number 1 as a state, building modern state, modern institutions, like even this one is part of the institutions of the state in one way or the other. Number 2 is the rule of law. And of course, number 3 is accountability through democracy. Every modern state must be premised on those 3 areas. What PBOs are doing is actually strengthening the accountability part. But as you look at the budget making process now, it is no longer a domain of the executive. Then in one way or the other, the accountability part is also serving the state part. Because once we have the right budget, the budget is serving the entire state. It is not just a tool of accountability, but also it also serves as making a progressive state. And I look at Africa and sometimes I see contrasts. You read the findings, and especially insofar as natural resources are concerned. Africa is a very wealthy continent. But on the other side, our people remain poor because of many issues that we'll be discussing in this forum across this week. And there is something that I really, and I'm not talking now about just budget making, but general economics. There is something that has been preached in our economic classes, because I see many of us here are economists. The issue of comparative and competitive advantage. And then we are told countries must specialize in areas especially where they are comparatively enjoying an advantage. Then what that portends then is that many African countries, by using that orthodox economics, then we are domiciled around our, in quotes, comparative advantage, which is exploitation of raw materials, which is agriculture, and any other thing that is raw in nature and primary in nature. These are my thoughts, that even as we talk about comparative and competitive advantage, we can actually bring home some of the advantages because some of the advantages that an economy must keep on harnessing are not those that are natural in nature, but we must adopt technology so that we can continue attracting much more advantages into our countries. Because when we domicile our advantage around raw material, around primary production, then we lose a lot. Because in between raw materials and finished products, there is a lot in between. Number one is the multiplier. Number two is creation of jobs. Number three is demand for technology. The other one is the creation of that technology, enhanced incomes for the people, which then generally becomes enhanced incomes for the state through taxes and through other revenue measures. And therefore, I implore upon all of us as Africa, we must not continue domiciling our economies around raw and around primary. We must move forward, because technology then multiplies. It multiplies everything that I have enumerated there before. Reading through history, every country and every continent have their critical junctures. And I keep thinking probably our critical juncture as Africa is probably what we are trying to do in creating a single market across Africa. Africa Free Trade Area. If you look at across the world, one milestone leads to the other. And I want to quote a few countries that I really enjoy reading about, because I think we share a lot in common, both in history and also in terms of where we are going. And also, I'm combining this with my first point around having a modern state, rule of law, and accountability, because they are all conjoined in one way or the other. South Korea, because I tend to believe as much as we want to grow organically, there must be some radical changes that then gives way into real growth across nations. South Korea was a normal state, a normal country like Kenya, like any other African country, like Uganda and the rest. But in 1961, they got a different kind of leadership through General Park, who was at the helm for around 19 years. He came up with a policy of export-led economy, to grow the economy using exports. And he formed an export committee, which its main mandate and domain was to enhance the export of or out of South Korea. They created chaebols, like the phone I use, Samsung, the other vehicles you use, Hyundai. These were actually a creation of government. Somehow, I remember sometimes in economic classes, we used to say that there are economies that actually thrive on corruption. If you use corruption strictly as use of public funds for private means. Sometimes, by the way, private means can be more efficient. Somehow, I don't want to use the word corruption, but that is the model that South Korea actually adopted. Using public money to actually make private companies thrive. And from 1961, going all the way to 1979, thereabout, the exports of South Korea grew for 363 times. And the presidents of South Korea attended all the monthly meetings of the Committee of the Exports. And I believe that was the critical juncture of South Korea. A combination of leadership, a combination of an open economy, but also real deliberate policies. Coming to China, as you know, way before time of Mao Zedong, there were failed policies. The revolution, proletarian revolution, the cultural revolution. But from 1978, after Mao Zedong departed in 1976, of course, Deng Xiaoping took over in 1978. Simple but far-reaching policies. opening up the economy, opening up the basis of the economy, rechanging, recalibrating. By opening up of China, sometimes Mao Zedong would go, and I remember reading somewhere, he went to Singapore for a visit, and he was shocked that no more homes had fridges in their houses. Small things. But my point is this. From 1978, change of policies, change of leadership, an economy where the GDP per capita was actually at par with that of Tanzania. Now we are talking about much many more times. And in terms of real growth, from 20, just look at this kind of statistics. From 2013 to 2015, the economy of China poured the same kind of concrete that the US poured for the entire 100 years before. I'm not using concrete as a measure of economy. I'm just trying to show how some things can change many other variables collectively. Lastly, of course, we have all cited Singapore because it's a very nice economic model to cite. And I don't want to buttress that point because I understand many of us have been referencing on Singapore. Leadership. Why am I talking about all these things? Between our raw materials, between our primary production, and these other end of finished products, exports, more incomes, etc., there lies leadership. And leadership is informed. And the work of PBOs is to inform. The people you are currently informing also inform higher authorities. And therefore, the work you do as PBOs, just know, in one way or actually many other ways, you actually influence the destinations of our African economies. Masida, unasikia hiyo maneno? I'll talk about a few more points. One is corruption. For me, I don't look at corruption as just taking a bribe. In Kenya, we call it hongo, or in Tanzania. That is negligible corruption. It actually does not affect the macros. The corruption that affects macros is patronage and clientelism. And of course, corruption that is based in procurement. And I hope most of the people here can relate to what I'm saying. Because the current evolution of corruption now is not the previous one where you see a police officer. No. It is people in suits. Maybe that's why today I didn't wear a suit and a tie. Because what corruption does, in Africa, for example, many young people, when they even go to Harvard, they go to Yale, they go to the other big universities within Africa, the ambition number one is to become a politician. When you go to other developed countries, the ambition of a young person who is bright and intelligent is Silicon Valley or Wall Street. Because in Africa, when you are a politician, you are able to extract rent. And instead of bothering too much to work too hard, then people feel there are easier ways, of course, to make their lives better and to progress in life. When this is done multi-year, then it changes the entire dynamics of how you look at our economies. Because when all the bright people who would be business people, entrepreneurs, all want to become politicians, then on this other end, who will become the drivers of the real private economy? That is something we need to think about. Clientelism, it happens especially in Kenya across our counties, not more in our country as a nation, because we have put safeguards. When you become a leader, you want all your relatives to be employed around where you have influence. What that does, it balloons the expenditure, which has nothing in return for the economy. Clientelism. You want to give a favor for somebody who gave you a favor on this other end. It is the same kind of patronage. All those compounded, I think, are a monster in terms of the corruption that is really weighing down our economies when they need to take off. I want to finish, but I can't finish without talking about debt. Because every country here, we have a menace of debt. Debt that is almost becoming unsustainable. As PBOs, we need to think deeper. Because I used to think, and we used to read, that you only invoke deficit in your budgeting when you must. But nowadays, deficit is actually a line of revenue, the revenue side of our budgets. That even when you are talking about recurrent expenditure, on the other side of revenue, we proudly say that one of the line of financing our budget is actually deficit. And then, after that is done for many years, of course that is what becomes our public debt. And our public debt, on the revenue side of our budget, it becomes an animal we call CFS, Consolidated Fund Services. Consolidated Fund Services should not be the gigantic figures that we are reading in our budgets across Africa now. In Kenya, our CFS is larger than the salaries of our public servants. I don't think that is the right direction to continue on. In Uganda, the same. In the other African countries, the same. We must find a way of generating internal revenues. Of course, using the other points that I gave there before, and the other engagements that we'll be having in this session across the many days, or three or so days. We must be able to grow our economy, grow our revenues, but at the same time cut on our appetite to spend too much. And expenditure that I'm talking about is not that which is capital in nature. Because capital expenditure is investment. I'm talking about the same point that I gave, clientelism. Our public service, to a large extent, across Africa, we can perform the same duties with 60% of the employees of government. But why do we have the 100%? Why? Because once you get a position, for example, to serve in public office, you want to have many people around you, people you recognize, and especially using keen selection and the other ways or basic building blocks of sociability, which are not merit-based. So decision making, before you make a decision for the country, you make one for yourself and your village. But then, it is the country that showed us your decision making. You know, many times we keep on saying, every country borrows. Like here, all our finance ministers, when they go on TV, and I'm sure this is not just an issue of East Africa, but across Africa, the justification is very, very academic. Even the US borrows. Their debt to GDP ratio is past 100%. Japan is 250%. So ours at 60, we are still too low. But then, that is comparing a crocodile and an apple. Things that you should never compare. Why? In Africa, for example, you look at the 10-year board of Kenya, we are now cruising above 12%. If you include that it is actually less tax, we are going past 15%, 10-year board. And by the way, currently in Africa, there is a more general appetite for short-term instruments than long-term, because we don't even have confidence in the long-term in our own economies. But that is besides the point. The cost of borrowing in African countries, we cannot continue to compare ourselves with Japan and the rest. Prior to COVID, Japan 10-year board sometimes would go even to negative interest rates. So there is nothing to compare. You look at the currency. Kenya, for example, we have 50% of our national sovereign debt is domestic, 50% is foreign. All this foreign, the lion's share is dollar denominated. When there is a variable, just a small variable of 1%, our debt portfolio compiles or piles without use. In Africa, we borrow to do everything. You can borrow to pay salaries. You can borrow to do the other things. Borrowing must always be specific and must always be for capital expenditure, and that which will generate much more interest within the economy so that the economy grows and we are able to actually service the loans without overtaxing our people. But let me stop there in terms of debt, because I know we have a session around debt. But even as I close, over borrowing sometimes, take for example Japan or the US, you look at their composition. Just recently there was always a closure in the US, a shutdown, because they wanted to increase their debt from that 1 trillion. But look at the composition of the US debt. They borrow from the retirement benefit fund for the army, for this other group, for this other group. But then our debt, most of it, we borrow externally. So there are some things that are distinct. Our economies and the other ones that we compare ourselves with when we want to generate or to increase our appetite to borrow more. We cannot continue to put ourselves on the same radar as those other countries, and especially the ones that I've cited. Allow me to close with one of the things that are really ravaging our economies. One is the cost of living. This, I'm sure it is cutting across, which in other words, we can use the name inflation or the word inflation to describe. And I am saying this because I think as Africa, we must find alternatives to some of the global parameters that we find ourselves subjugated beneath. I've cited, for example, about borrowing. Some of the very important components of borrowing is the cost. One of the issues that actually enhance or direct the cost of borrowing is how our countries are rated. Simple things. To a normal Kenyan, a normal African, they don't know these things. But on the other side, and let me use Kenya, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking almost in parables because of time. Kenya, we read a budget of 3.744 trillion Kenya shillings. Out of that, you can just pick 3.7. Out of that, 970 billion is going into CFS. CFS is predominantly managed to service our loans. This servicing of loans, we are not talking about redemptions. We are talking about interest rates. Now, our rating agency just writes a one paragraph and says to media. That one paragraph they said to media affects the money our budget committee allocates to development or capital expenditure in Kenya. Why? I've talked about 970 billion CFS. If interest rate was just half of what it is globally, or how much Kenya is charged by our creditors, then our capital expenditure, which is around 800 billion, would be more than $1 trillion. I want you to see the whole round. A normal Kenyan in a village awaiting a road. We have allocated 800 billion into development. But on this other side, we have allocated 970 billion into consolidated fund services, which majority of it goes into paying of interest rates. Then Moody's or Standard & Poor's, they issue a pressure. Oh, Kenya is in this kind of situation. Then our interest rate goes higher. What that means, you know how we budget across Africa, and I'm sure the same we do in Kenya, we do across other African countries. You budget the CFS first. It is a first charge. So what you do by just Moody's giving a pressure, they increase our CFS and they take up from our capital expenditure. I keep on saying the African Union must find other instruments of rating our debt and giving our financial ratings other than over reliance on agencies that has got nothing to do with how we live here in Africa. So I was talking about inflation. Look at this other one here, lastly. This is my last point. How we become victims of how other economies behave. The US, during COVID, they give interest rates. They give checks, sorry. They give checks. COVID checks is a good thing for their citizens. These COVID checks raise the appetite for consumption. Appetite for consumption brings domestic inflation within the US. When the US, the Fed, wants to cure that domestic inflation, they raise the Fed rate. They have raised the Fed rate for 11 consecutive times. When they raise the Fed rate in the US to cure their domestic problem, our own Nairobi Securities Exchange, our own currency, our own food in the plate of a person in the village in Muranga gets affected. Why? When they raise interest rates, now past 5%, the people who have invested across Africa and other emerging economies, they see a safe haven for investment because they see a place where they can invest, and especially on fixed income in the US. So they sell their stocks in the NSC, they steer their investments, they divest from emerging and especially African economies, they take dollars back home. Capital flight. That capital flight now becomes very pivotal on how our currencies behave. When our shilling now depreciates, it becomes not a double-edged, but even triple-edged sword. Because once they increase, most of our African countries, we import including food. Edible oil in Kenya is the #2 import across all the tickets in Kenya and across many African countries. So what am I trying to say? Just that one move of the US, they affect our capital configuration here. They affect our currency. They affect our food import. Consequently, they affect even the plate of a person who does not know all these jargons. We must find a way. And I'm very happy about the seminar in the South Africa, BRICS, because we must find alternatives. We cannot continue to be a victim of a few global economies. With those many remarks, I thank you all.
Thank you, Chief Guest. Thank you so much. I agree with the Clerk of Senate, perhaps. Say this is Africa. And I think Africa is our business. Wilson, come forward. We just give a vote of thanks before we break for a photo session. We are racing against time. So chief guest, we have a school of clapping. And the principal of the school of clapping is Millicent. We are in the process of recruitment of the African network for the school of clapping. Karibu, karibu.
Thank you very much. This school of clapping needs funding, Daktari. So we look for a budget line, and Mheshimiwa Nyoro is there. So when we approach the budget committee, I'm sure he'll be able to sort us. Anyway, my assignment is to thank all of our speakers today. The Clerk of the National Assembly, thank you for gracing our occasion. The Clerk of the Senate, thank you very much for gracing our occasion. The President, we were told to refer to you as the President. So the President of the African Network of Parliamentary Budget Offices, and our main speaker, Mheshimiwa Ndindi Nyoro. Thank you very much for the remarks you have made, and for both on behalf of the speaker and on your own behalf. And I think people didn't quite understand what you were saying when you said you're a fish out of water when it comes to economics. And then when you started speaking, we saw you get in your element, and we saw you relax, and we saw you give us an economics lecture. Actually, everyone was just nodding and taking notes, and you kept saying, lastly, but then you would remember another point and, hit that point correctly. So thank you very much for that. And it's always great to listen to the, to listen from the outside, how people view us from the outside looking in. Because when we work as staff of PBO, it can be a lonely place. You're being held to account sometimes for some decisions. You give advice. Sometimes your hands are tied. You're not sure if you're performing your role well. But when you listen to the people you serve, and you listen from the outsiders who are looking in, even as we watched our documentary, you'll realize that actually we are doing something. So even though we have not reached where we want to go, we are on our way there. We are not where we started. So thank you very much. So without speaking too much, because I think our speakers have addressed most matters, I would like us to give a proper clap to our speakers, and especially our main speaker, Mheshimiwa Nyoro. So kindly let's be upstanding so that we can honor. And as you've been told, the school of clapping, so we don't just clap anyhowly in Kenya for our visitors. We have modified claps for different occasions. So for this particular occasion, we want to do a presidential clap. It's called makofi ya kilo. The Kenyans understand it. It's very simple. You just clap 3 times, and then I'll interject and say something. But usually that interjection is made in Kiswahili. So for those who don't understand Kiswahili, you will excuse us. We will translate later. So let's start. 1. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Nyoro kwa kutuhutubia siku ya leo. Mola akuzidishie maarifa ya kuongoza. Funga. Fungua. Thank you.
Yeah, we can go for a group. Masharia, where are you? Guide us for the group photo out here. Then we should be back by 12:30. Thank you.
ilikuwa inatoka na hii mic. Brenda kupatia mic stand nyingine mzuri. Mic test 1 2. Eh. Mic test 1 2 1 2 3. Mic test 1 2 1 2 3. Mic test 1 2 1 2 3. Mic test. Hapo iko sawa? Iko ama ni kamera ile? 1 2 3.